Have you ever thought about the fact that there are stories so strong, so deep, that they seem to have been ripped straight from life itself and written with tears? Yes, what I'm about to share with you now is not fiction, not a fairy tale, not a made-up story. It's flesh, it's blood, it's pain, and it's also victory. It's the kind of narrative that begins in the darkest night, but ends bathed in the light of faith. My name is Evelyn, and before I continue, I want to invite you. Don't listen to this testimony as if it were just another story. Listen as if it were a revelation, because the moment you open your heart to every word, something inside you may begin to change too. My journey did not begin with lullabies or joyful embraces, but with tears. Motherhood, which should have been a time of fullness, was soon marked by rejection, domestic violence, tyranny, and fear. I watched my daughters treated like bargaining chips in forced marriage negotiations. I lived through the harshness of poverty. I spent sleepless nights caring for a baby burning in fever. And in the end, I faced the deepest pain, the death of a child, burying my own daughter with my bare hands. But don't think this is just a story of sorrow. No. It is also a story of promise, of escape, of surviving persecution, of finding shelter, of hope and reconstruction. It is about discovering that there is indeed such a thing as marriage for love, that there is survival for those who refuse to give up, that faith in God is stronger than any silence, and that true deliverance always comes when we rise up with courage. That's why I tell you, don't leave this video before the end. Every part of this account is like a mirror that may reveal something inside you. Maybe you have faced wounds in your family. Maybe you know too well the weight of social judgment and gossip. Maybe you think there is no way out. But I am here to testify that there is. There is a way out. There is new life. There is victory. So before we move on, I ask you, subscribe to this channel right now. This isn't just about following videos. It's about forming a chain of faith, testimonies, and transformation. Every subscription is one more step in spreading messages of hope, so that more people find strength not to give up. Take a deep breath. Come into this story with me, and get ready. After hearing this testimony, you will never look at prayer, faith, and the strength of a mother in the same way again. Conclusion, 3,000 characters. If you've made it this far, then you know this is not just a story about a woman, her daughters, and the wounds of a broken home. Above all, it is a testimony that darkness is never the final word. The family the enemy tried to destroy was sustained by the hand of God. The motherhood that was scarred by pain was redeemed in love. Rejection, tyranny, poverty, illness, the death of a child, even the burial with my own hands, none of these things were the end. All of it was transformed into promise, escape, refuge, reconstruction, hope, marriage for love, and ultimately, deliverance. I learned that it is not human strength that keeps us standing, but the grace and mercy of God. And that's why now I speak directly to you. No matter your pain, no matter the weight you carry, no matter the persecution that hunts you or the scars that refuse to heal, there is a living God, reaching out his hand to you right now. Maybe you feel like your life has been nothing but loss and grief. Maybe you have even thought there is no way out. But let me tell you with certainty, there is. There is new life, there is deliverance, there is victory. And the name of this way is Jesus Christ. He is the one who turns mourning into dancing, shame into honor, weakness into strength. He is the one who takes a story written in pain and rewrites it with hope. And now I want to invite you. Give your life to Jesus. Open your heart and speak to him just as you are. Say, Lord Jesus, I give my life into your hands. Free me from the weight, from the fear, from the chains that bind me. Transform my story. I choose to live with you and for you. That simple act of faith has the power to change everything. Because when you surrender to him, heaven opens, chains fall, your soul finds peace, and your life is filled with purpose. And I also invite you to subscribe to this channel right now. This is not just about watching videos. It's about walking together in faith, strengthening each other, and spreading testimonies that heal, deliver, and inspire hope. Every subscription is a seed planted so that more lives can be reached. Remember, no prayer is in vain. Every tear shed before God is gathered like incense before his throne. And if he transformed my story, he can transform yours too. Today you have a choice. To keep carrying the weight of pain alone, or to give your life to Jesus and experience true deliverance. I chose him, and I was never the same again. Now it's your turn. My name is Evelyn, and the story I carry in my chest is not one that a person tells lightly. It's not the kind of memory you share at the dinner table or among neighbors on a sunny afternoon. It's the kind of testimony that bleeds, that trembles, that sometimes still keeps you awake at night. Yet I tell it because silence almost destroyed me. And I believe that speaking out might bring healing to others who, like me, have faced darkness inside their own homes. The truth is that my family was never what the village thought it was. To outsiders, we looked like any other hardworking household. But behind closed doors, our walls echoed with domestic violence, threats, and a tyranny that crushed both body and soul. When I became a mother, I thought motherhood would protect me from despair. I thought a child in my arms would be enough to soften James's heart, my husband, who carried more bitterness than love in his veins. But I was wrong. The night my youngest daughter, Annabelle, was born, the cold gnawed at my bones. I still remember the wind whistling through the pine trees outside, a sound that seemed like the earth itself was mourning what was to come. I held my baby girl against me, frail, fighting for every breath. My heart pounded with love, but also with fear, because I knew the eyes of my husband. And those eyes didn't see hope when they looked at her. They saw burden, weakness, cost. He entered the room without wonder, without even the slightest admiration for the miracle of life. His voice was sharp, cutting deeper than the pain still raging in my body from childbirth. "We will not cling to a sick child," he said coldly. The words stabbed into me like knives. Tears filled my eyes as I whispered back, "She is ours, James." But his reply was a sentence carved in ice. "Yours, not mine." I don't feed problems. From that night on, I realized that the home where I lived was not a home at all, but a prison. My eldest daughter, Ruth, already knew what it meant to survive there. She had learned young that silence was safer than words. She had seen plates fly, doors slam, fists crash. She knew how to vanish into corners, how to become invisible when James's anger filled the rooms. I tried to shield her, making coffee in silence, smoothing the bed as if order could keep the storm away. But storms don't respect neat sheets or tidy kitchens, and so the days became heavier. Annabelle's tiny body burned with fever, her forehead hot under my trembling hands. I stayed awake through the nights, praying without closing my eyes, bargaining with God, offering everything I didn't have if only He would spare her. Ruth watched me, learning quietly that sometimes love is nothing but persistence in the face of despair. But James had other plans. He began speaking of Ruth as if she were a coin to be traded. "The Johnsons are looking for a wife for their son, Robert. They have money. If the deal goes through, our lives will return to order," he said one night, his tone as cold as iron. Deal. That word rang like chains falling on the floor. I looked at Ruth, still a child, and my voice broke as I said, "She's just a girl." He turned to me slowly, his eyes burning with that merciless glare, and replied, "She is what I say she is." It was then that fear settled into our walls like a permanent guest. Every knock on the door made my heart stop. Every whisper in the marketplace felt like the village already knew Ruth's fate. I could see her shrinking inside herself, clutching at the scraps of her childhood while men's voices negotiated her life as though she were cattle. At the same time, Annabelle's fever grew worse. Some nights I thought I could feel her slipping away in my arms. My prayers turned into screams inside my chest, though my lips stayed pressed tight, because even crying could bring James's wrath. I begged heaven to intervene, but the heavens seemed silent. The poverty of our home became unbearable. There were days when the cupboard held nothing but crumbs, days when Ruth went to bed hungry because I had given the last piece of bread to Annabelle. My hands were raw from scrubbing, sewing, begging for any small job that could keep us alive. Yet James spent what little we had on drink, returning with breath soaked in whiskey and fists heavy with rage. And through it all, the fear never left me. Fear of losing Ruth to a man she did not choose. Fear of burying Annabelle before she had even learned to walk. Fear of James's voice, his silence, his gaze. Fear that I would never find the strength to break free. But inside me, a spark still flickered. Maybe it was faith, maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was God Himself refusing to let me sink completely. I knew deep down that the chains around us were not eternal. And though the nights were long and the tears endless, I whispered to myself in the dark, "One day, this story will not end in tyranny. One day there will be deliverance." The days that followed felt like walking barefoot over sharp glass. Every step was agony. Every hour carried the weight of uncertainty. Annabelle's little chest rose and fell unevenly, the fever clinging to her like a shadow that wouldn't let go. I pressed cool cloths to her forehead, whispering prayers that felt more like desperate bargains than words of faith. Ruth would sit nearby, her hands folded tight, her eyes full of questions she didn't dare speak aloud. "Will she get better, Mama?" she whispered one night. I wanted to tell her yes with conviction, but my answer trembled more like a plea. "Yes, my child. She will." Meanwhile, James's plans for Ruth grew more sinister. He began to speak openly about the negotiation with the Johnsons, about how Ruth's marriage to Robert would bring money, land, and order to our chaotic lives. To him, Ruth wasn't a child. She was a transaction, a problem to be solved. The violence in his words cut almost as deeply as his fists. I begged him to stop, to wait, to see that Ruth was too young, but his eyes hardened. "She is mine to give. Mine." The sound of his voice was a chain clamping tighter around us. I knew then that silence could kill as surely as fists. But silence was the only weapon I had to keep us alive another day. I tiptoed through the hours, praying Annabelle's fever would break, praying James would lose interest in Ruth's fate, praying for a miracle that never seemed to come. And the poverty pressed in closer. Some nights I fed Ruth watered-down broth while my own stomach clawed with hunger. I learned to pretend that I wasn't starving, smiling faintly so my daughters wouldn't see my emptiness. Then came the night Ruth tried to escape. I remember it as if it were yesterday. The house was thick with the smell of whiskey, James snoring heavy in the next room. Ruth's small hands clutched a cloth bundle of her few belongings. Her eyes burned with a mixture of terror and determination. "If I stay, he'll kill me inside." "If I go, maybe I'll have a chance," she whispered. My heart nearly stopped, but I nodded. I kissed her forehead, pressed Annabelle against my chest, and opened the door quietly. For a moment, I thought she might actually make it, but hope was short-lived. Before dawn, I heard heavy boots in the yard, angry voices, and then saw Ruth dragged back between two men. Their hands had left red marks around her arms, gripping her as though she were cargo. "Your father said you might try something foolish," one of them sneered. James followed, his face carved in stone. He didn't need to raise his voice. His silence was worse than shouting. He looked at Ruth the way a butcher looks at livestock. His words were ice. "In 2 weeks, you will be his wife. No more foolishness." I took Ruth to her room, washed her wounds, and held her trembling body. She fought back her tears with the same iron silence I knew too well. The silence of those who had learned that sound only brought punishment. That night, as I watched Annabelle burn with fever and Ruth clutch a wedding dress like a funeral shroud, I realized our home had become both prison and coffin. I begged God for a sign. I begged him to intervene. But sometimes heaven feels unbearably quiet. Days turned into nights, and the nights stretched into eternity. The fear gnawed at me like a rat in the walls, always there, always chewing away at my resolve. And then came the breaking point. Annabelle's fever lifted suddenly in the middle of the night, and for a fleeting second, hope surged in me. But as I held her tiny body, I realized she had grown far too still, far too light. The fire had gone out not because she was healed, but because there was nothing left to burn. My baby was gone. The scream never left my throat. I rocked her lifeless body in silence, whispering her name as if I could call her spirit back. Tears fell so heavily I thought I would drown in them. James stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw humanity flicker in his eyes, but it died quickly. His words were daggers. "At least that's one less mouth to feed." Then he turned and walked away. In that instant, something inside me shattered, but something else was born. I buried Annabelle myself with my own hands in the cold earth behind the house. The soil filled my nails, cut my fingers, and swallowed my hope. But as I covered her small body, I made a promise. I swore no other child of mine would be buried alive in a marriage she did not choose, or in a house built on tyranny. I swore that one day we would be free. And though I felt empty, broken, and hollow, I also felt the faintest flicker of faith. Maybe God had allowed my tears to water a seed of strength. Maybe he was whispering through my pain, "This is not the end. Hold on." After Annabelle's burial, nothing in me was the same. The soil under my nails, the weight of that small body in my arms, it all haunted me. Every breath felt heavier, as if grief had taken root in my chest. I had entered the deepest valley of mourning, and yet strangely, From that valley sprouted the first fragile seed of courage. James no longer looked at me as a wife. To him, I was simply a shadow moving around the house, a servant to his whims. His drinking worsened, and the silence between us became sharper than knives. Ruth moved like a ghost, clutching her dress of doom, each stitch in the fabric echoing the sound of chains. The wedding day loomed like a death sentence. One evening, while James sat at the table peeling an apple with the slow precision of an executioner, he repeated without looking up, "In 2 weeks, she will be married." The peel fell to the floor like a red ribbon, but to me it looked like a noose tightening around Ruth's neck. I could see the terror in her eyes, though she tried to hide it. "Mama, if I go, I will die inside. If I stay, he will kill me from the outside," she whispered in the darkness. Her words pierced me more deeply than any of James's blows ever had. It was then that I knew we couldn't stay. If we did, Ruth's soul would be buried alongside Annabelle's small grave behind the house. My promise at Annabelle's burial site rang in my ears. No other child of mine will be buried alive. That vow became my fuel. Still, I had no plan, no allies, only whispers of a name, Dr. Heinrich. They said he lived beyond the bridge, a man who asked no questions if your eyes told the truth. Some said he was a healer, others a man with secrets. But all I knew was that he wasn't James, and that was enough for me to cling to the hope that he could help us. The days leading up to Ruth's wedding were torture. James strutted around as though he had already sealed his business deal with the Johnsons. I felt the social judgment pressing in from the village, neighbors whispering, women shaking their heads, men muttering about loyalty and duty. To them, I was the rebellious wife, the disobedient mother. They saw Ruth's arranged marriage as tradition, as order, as necessity, but I saw it for what it was: slavery. The night before Ruth was to be taken, something inside me snapped. James lay passed out on the sofa, reeking of liquor. Ruth stood in the corner, her small bag in her hands, trembling but ready. I clutched her hand, Annabelle's absence burning in my heart like a brand, and I whispered, "It's time." Tonight, we run. We moved like shadows through the house, praying the floorboards wouldn't creak. The cold bit into our skin as we slipped outside, the moon casting long, haunting shadows. For the first time in years, the air tasted of possibility. Every step was an act of faith, every breath a plea for protection. My heart raced with the thought of James waking and finding us gone, of his heavy steps pounding after us, of his fists dragging us back into the darkness. But in that moment, fear and faith danced together in my chest. Fear of what might come if we were caught. Faith that God had not let me bury one child in vain, that he would honor the promise I had made with blood, soil, and tears. We walked toward the bridge, toward the house of Dr. Heinrich, carrying nothing but a bundle of clothes, a few scraps of bread, and the weight of our broken souls. Ruth's small voice broke the silence as she asked, "Mama, what if they find us?" My answer was quiet but fierce. "Then we keep running. But tonight, we don't go back." For the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. And though the night pressed hard around us, inside me something whispered, "Deliverance is near." The night of our escape carved itself into my memory like fire on stone. James lay collapsed on the sofa, lost to his drink, while silence pressed heavy against the walls. My heart thundered in my chest as I took Ruth's trembling hand and whispered, "Now." It's now or never. Fear clawed at me, but alongside it grew a fierce courage born from grief, from the soil under my nails when I buried Annabelle with my own hands. I refused to bury another daughter alive under the weight of a forced marriage. Ruth's eyes were wide with terror, but behind them I could see the faint light of faith. She trusted me to lead her out of the darkness. We stepped into the cold night, carrying only a small bundle of clothes, a crust of bread, and Mama Joe's worn Bible. Every step on that dirt road was both a prayer and a risk. I whispered under my breath, "Lord, guide us, protect us from persecution, cover us with your deliverance." At the edge of the next village stood the house of Dr. Heinrich, the man whose name I had clung to like a rope in the storm. When we knocked, the sky was still black. He opened the door, eyes tired yet gentle, and without hesitation he said, "Come in. Here, you are safe." For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. Ruth curled up in a corner, and within minutes, she was asleep without fear. I sat in silence, listening to her steady breathing, and for the first time since Annabelle's death, I breathed deeply too. But freedom is never free. The judgment of society reached us even from afar. The gossip spread quickly. She left her husband. She dishonored him. She broke tradition. Women shook their heads. Men spat the words ungrateful and foolish. But none of it mattered to me anymore. I had carried too many losses to let their tongues enslave me. For me, survival was no longer shame. It was victory. We worked hard to keep ourselves afloat. I washed clothes for neighbors, scrubbed floors, cooked meals for pennies. Ruth helped where she could. We fought poverty together, side by side, but with dignity intact. Every coin earned by our hands tasted like hope. Every loaf of bread was seasoned with faith in God, who had not abandoned us. It was in this new season that Joseph appeared. He was a carpenter, his hands scarred from labor, his smile quiet but honest. Unlike the men who had once bargained for Ruth's life, Joseph never looked at her as property, but as a soul. He brought wood on cold nights, offered help without asking for anything in return. Over time, affection bloomed, timid at first, but strong. Ruth, once marked by rejection and the shadow of her father's tyranny, found in Joseph a love untainted by cruelty. It wasn't a bargain. It wasn't an arrangement. It was a choice. It was marriage for love. When Joseph asked for Ruth's hand, I looked into my daughter's eyes. "This time," I said softly, "you decide. Only if your heart says yes." Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered her answer, "Yes." And in that moment, I saw the reconstruction of our story. What had begun in ashes was now rebuilt with light. Years later, as I sat on the porch watching Ruth's children, my grandchildren, play in the yard, I opened the old notebook I carried since the beginning and wrote, "Escape, grief, hunger, persecution, but also faith, deliverance, hope, and victory. This is my testimony." Today, when I look back, I know it wasn't my strength that saved us. It was God's hand, guiding us, shielding us, loving us when no one else would. The family that had once been defined by violence and despair was now a monument to love and survival. I, Evelyn, carry the certainty that every tear I shed watered seeds of faith, deliverance, and hope. My testimony is not of despair, but of victory. And if I leave anything behind, let it be this: never accept tyranny as destiny. There is always a way out. There is always reconstruction. There is always hope. If you've come this far, then you know this isn't just a story about a woman, her children, and the wounds of a broken home. Above all, it is a testimony that darkness is never the final word. The family the enemy tried to shatter was held together by the hand of God. The motherhood scarred by pain was redeemed in love. Rejection, tyranny, poverty, illness, even the death of a child and the burial with my own hands, none of that was the end. All of it was transformed into promise: escape, shelter, reconstruction, hope, marriage for love, and ultimately, into deliverance. I discovered that it's not human strength that keeps us standing. It's the grace and mercy of God. And that's why I speak directly to you now. No matter what pain you carry, no matter how heavy the weight, no matter the persecution that follows you or the scars that refuse to heal, there is a living God, and His hand is stretched out to you in this very moment. Maybe your life feels like an endless cycle of loss, grief, and disappointment. Maybe you've even thought there is no way out. But let me tell you with certainty, there is. There is new life, there is deliverance, there is victory. And that way has a name: Jesus Christ. He is the one who turns mourning into dancing, shame into honor, weakness into strength. He is the one who takes a story written in pain and rewrites it with hope. And I want to invite you right now to give your life to Jesus. You don't need perfect words. You don't need to clean yourself up before coming to Him. Speak to Him just as you are and say, "Lord Jesus, I give you my life." Break the chains that hold me, free me from the fear, lift the weight off my soul, and write a new story for me. I choose to live with you and for you. This simple act of surrender can change everything. Because when you give yourself to Him, heaven opens, chains fall, your soul finds peace, and your life finds purpose. And I also invite you, subscribe to this channel right now. This isn't just about watching a video. It's about walking together in faith, standing side by side, and spreading testimonies that heal, deliver, and give hope. Every subscription is a seed that helps carry these messages to someone who may be one step away from giving up. Remember this: no prayer is wasted. Every tear shed in the presence of God rises like incense before His throne. And if He transformed my story, He can transform yours too. Today, you have a choice. Keep carrying the pain alone, or place your life in the hands of Jesus and taste true deliverance. I chose Him, and I was never the same again. Now it's your turn.